You can be a soldier, policeman, executioner, and spy all at once. And you can also leave behind an aura of mystery, of darkness, of uncertainty about your own fate. You can be a bureaucrat and at the same time a butcher. You can be a historical figure and at the same time leave behind a legend. Our character today might answer some of these questions, or maybe not. Certainly, he left behind a long trail of terror and blood, as well as many uncertainties about what really happened to him after a certain point. A key figure in contemporary history, today we're talking about Heinrich Müller, the director of the Geheimstaatspolizei, the Gestapo. A difficult character to define, a key figure in the Nazi Reich, a central figure in the tragedy called the Holocaust. From spies, snoops, and other characters. But could they, who knows, try to imitate him? Son of a Bavarian Catholic family, for a short time a soldier during the Great War in an artillery unit, Heinrich Müller in the 1920s. Basically, he's a policeman, not just any policeman, but one involved in the political squad. Today, the political police basically no longer exist, not even in Italy. But until several years ago, it was a division, a section of the police squads. It was mainly responsible for monitoring political parties and extra-parliamentary groups, and, if necessary, to intervene with targeted repression and arrests. Heinrich Müller at that time is a police officer with political sympathies that will surprise you, but they weren't exactly in favor of the Nazis. In fact, it should be said that in his early years in the police force, Müller sympathized with the Bavarian People's Party, a more moderate center-right party. At one point, he even got a membership card in defiance of police regulations that forbade subordinates from joining political parties. And as a member of the Bavarian People's Party, at least on one occasion, Heinrich Müller even clashed with the Nazis. Those Nazis who, after the failure of the beer hall putsch, the Burger Brokeller putsch, had changed their strategy. No more violent takeover of Bavaria, but instead exploiting the cumbersome political machinery of the Weimar Republic to gain more and more support. More and more seats in the Reichstag, that is, in Parliament, and increasing influence in the country and especially in the political life of Germany. Well, on March 9, 1933, when the Nazis were already close to taking power. In fact, they were even considering the possibility of a coup d'etat in case their Führer, Adolf Hitler, was not appointed chancellor. Well, Heinrich Müller was already taking countermeasures because in the region where Müller was operating, the Nazis were ready to take to the streets with weapons to overthrow the regional government itself. On this occasion, Müller armed the police officers and told them to be ready. That in the event of a popular uprising or a coup, they would have to take control of the situation and react without mercy. In light of all this, it seems almost unbelievable that less than a year later, the same Heinrich Müller left the Bavarian People's Party and joined the Nazi SS Party. That he ended up under the protective wing of Reinhard Heydrich, the dark eminence of the emerging Nazi regime, and that, as such, he was given more and more responsibilities, starting from the first major purge of the new regime. We've already talked about it, the night of the long knives, those 24 hours when Hitler decided to settle old scores, not only with Ernst Röhm and his Sturmabteilung, but also with all the various opponents. With Gregor Strasser, for example, who had tried to overtake him within the party, but also with General von Schleicher, who had tried to oppose him by relying on the dying President Hitler. On that night of the long knives, Heinrich Müller played a decisive role. He was one of the commanders of the columns that went to take the victims from their beds, bringing them to prison, and then shooting them. And perhaps even participating in this great purge paved the way for Heinrich Müller's meteoric career, a truly incredible career. Let's quickly go over it step by step. As we said, in 1934, Müller joined the SS. After a few weeks, he took part in the Night of the Long Knives. Shortly after, he became involved first with the Gestapo, and then after the Gestapo was separated and taken out of Hermann Göring's control. Directly in the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, the High Office for the Security of the Reich, Reinhard Heydrich's creation to keep the German people and then half of Europe crushed under the Nazi heel. Within the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, Heinrich Müller commands and leads Amt for Office Number 4, which is the Gestapo, Geheime Staatspolizei, the Secret State Police. The name, decidedly sinister, along with its acronym, would become synonymous with terror, starting with the uniform favored by Gestapo officers. At that time, in Germany and then throughout much of occupied Europe, the German police were basically divided into 4 branches. The Orpo, Ordnungspolizei, the order police, that is, city police, traffic controllers, firefighters, intervened exclusively in situations of public order. The Kripo, Kriminalpolizei, the 5th office of the Reichssicherheitshauptamt, under the direction of Arthur Nebe. The criminal police dealt with common criminals, thieves, murderers, rapists, bank robbers, forgers. They are the investigators, but they wear the SS uniform. And like them, the members of the Sicherheitspolizei also wear the SS uniform. Sicherheitspolizei, the security police, one of the 2 branches of the 3rd office of the Reich Main Security Office, together with the Sicherheitsdienst, the security service. They are Heydrich's favored creatures and are used to spread terror as well as to lead the persecutions. And then there's the Gestapo. The Gestapo rarely wears a uniform, but Müller does. He likes it. He's elegant in his SS general's uniform, a uniform of which he always wears only the office attire, the one with the white shirt and the dark tie. He never wears the field uniform, the so-called combat one. Obviously, he never wears the work uniform either, always and only the office attire. Because deep down, he's a bureaucrat, but a ruthless kind of bureaucrat. His subordinates, on the other hand, are easily recognizable. They walk around in long, shiny black leather coats that mean terror, when those coats knock on a door or break down the door itself. It's not courtesy, it's to remove someone and make them vanish. Most of the time, it's in the underground rooms of the Gestapo headquarters in Berlin on Prince Albrecht Strasse, a big gray building whose address becomes synonymous with terror. Everyone knows what's on Prince Albrecht Strasse, but no one talks about it. No one dares to say the name Gestapo in public. They're too afraid. It brings up too much fear of ending up in those cells. Cells you never leave, used for torture, extracting information, and ultimately summary executions. Müller is extremely efficient in his role as coordinator. Of the 6 departments that mainly make up the Gestapo, departments that actively control all life in the Reich and the occupied territories, he directly takes charge of Department A, which handles the Reich's so-called direct enemies. That is, the communists, the saboteurs, the rationalists, the liberals, the social democrats have always been, according to Müller, his primary enemies, those to be fought at any cost wherever they were. Over the course of his career, he would also make other enemies. Department B7 in churches, which is divided into 4 sub-departments, Catholics, Protestants, Freemasons, and Jews, he witnesses the rise of another protege of Reinhard Heydrich, a man we've already talked about extensively, Otto Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the final solution. And together with Eichmann, Müller takes part in the Wannsee Conference, a meeting that will go down in history as the one where the complete extermination of Jews in Europe was decided. Something monstrous, something we know about, only because one of the participants, going against orders, did not destroy the minutes that were sent to him, but kept them, maybe to use it as a tool for pressure or blackmail. From those minutes, we know that Müller took part in the meeting and was also one of the most enthusiastic in proposing certain solutions against the Jews. Communists, Social Democrats, Jews, and spies. For Heinrich Müller, spies, even inside the Reich, were a fourth group of enemies. So much so that in 1943, Heinrich Müller even decided to appear before the Reichsfuhrer of the SS, Himmler, the supreme head of the SS, presenting him with the first evidence of the betrayal of Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, that is, the German Armed Forces Intelligence and Counterintelligence Offices. Canaris would have betrayed because he was opposed to National Socialism to the point of having established contacts for several years with Allied intelligence agencies, plotting in the shadows to overthrow the regime. Incredibly, Himmler does not listen on that occasion to the accusations brought to him by Müller, who reacts badly and no longer trusts his boss. Besides, Heinrich is no longer there. He died a year earlier from the wounds he suffered in Prague, and he decides to support the cause of another of the top leaders of the Reich, Martin Bormann, the head of the Chancellery. After Hesse's escape to Scotland, he became known as the Brown Eminence, from the color of the jacket he always wore. Under Bormann, Müller gained even more power, the power to investigate any German citizen, even soldiers and high-ranking officers. After Operation Valkyrie, the July 20th, 1944 plot we discussed, Müller is granted special powers of arrest, investigation, and interrogation, even against his old enemy, Wilhelm Canaris, who is dismissed, imprisoned, and will eventually be executed in the Flossenburg concentration camp a few days before the arrival of the Allied troops, a sort of reckoning. Müller spends the last months of the Second World War with his unwavering faith in his leader. Hitler is convinced that what are actually the ramblings of a madman who has lost touch with reality are brilliant ideas. Müller is convinced that the Wunderwaffe exists, the miracle weapons that soon the Americans and the British on one side and the Soviets on the other will start fighting each other instead of fighting the Germans. He believes the Allied front will collapse and Germany will win. He is so convinced of it that he accepts the invitation to take refuge in the Führer bunker under the Berlin Chancellery. And inside that Führer bunker, he conducts his last interrogation against Hermann Fegelein, a cavalry officer of the Waffen-SS, the man who had married Eva Braun's sister, the man who had essentially become Hitler's brother-in-law, but who had decided to escape from Berlin, not wanting to die a hero's death or like a rat trapped. And after being arrested, he was brought in chains, weeping, into the chancellery of the underground bunker. There, it was Müller himself who interrogated him, even using harsh methods, until he sentenced him to death by firing squad, despite the pleas made to Hitler to spare his life. But all trace of Heinrich Müller is lost on May 1st, 1945. Hitler is dead. For some hours now, the Soviets have surrounded the remains of the Chancellery. A group of civilian staff tries to escape, joining the last column, that of Brigadier General Munke, who is trying to make his way through the ruins, the carnage, and the Soviet battalions. But Müller, where is he? Heinrich Müller, what happened to Heinrich Müller? He certainly isn't part of the small group led by Bormann, who is trying to escape and will die. It will be discovered several years later because of the explosion of a tank near the Chancellery. So where is he? He didn't join Münche either. He didn't stay in the Führer bunker to commit suicide. What happened to him after the war? The investigations into the disappearance of Heinrich Müller will lead to nothing. No one will be able to find concrete evidence of his escape or his death. Even in 1947, 2 years after the war ended, some units of the American counterintelligence, the Counterintelligence Corps, will raid the house of Anna Schmidt, the semi-official lover of Heinrich Müller, looking for traces of his presence, or at least letters and correspondence, some clue that could provide a useful element for the investigation. Nothing, absolutely nothing is found. The idea takes shape that Müller died during the Battle of Berlin, but his body is never found, unlike Bormann's, which will be found in the 1970s and later identified. Nothing is known about Müller, which is where his dark legend starts. According to some, Müller was taken to the east by the Soviets, collaborated with the People's Commissariat for Internal Affairs, the predecessor of the KGB, and then died of illness in Moscow in 1948. According to others, Müller was convinced by the Americans to defect in the last weeks of the war and was then exfiltrated and taken to America. During Operation Paperclip, the same operation that allowed scientists like Werner von Braun or Werner Heisenberg to switch to the American side. According to others, Müller simply escaped, taking advantage of the first escape routes organized by the Nazis, the famous Ratlines, the routes of the fugitives, those that would be used by the clandestine Odessa network to bring numerous fleeing war criminals south, then to put them on ships to Cairo, to Madrid, to Lisbon, or to Buenos Aires. But where did he go? Why can't he be found? His name remains at the top of the list of wanted Nazi war criminals for years and years. But while other criminals are tracked down, some are even captured. There's no sign of Müller, not even in South America or under an alias. Nothing that could actually lead back to a new identity for him. A few years ago, a journalist, Johannes Tuchel, director of a newspaper dedicated to the German resistance, revealed that Müller died a few days after the end of the war, in May 1945, possibly by suicide, and he would have been buried in a huge mass grave dug in the Jewish cemetery of Mitte. The news, of course, caused a scandal, a huge scandal. A war criminal, a criminal against humanity, a man who persecuted the Jews, buried together with his victims. However, this news was not well received. It was not possible to recover the remains of Heinrich Müller in such a way as to attempt even an identification with modern technologies. Sadly, his dark legend still endures today. Even today, we don't know where he ended up or what his fate was. If he really escaped to Moscow, how the Soviets managed to use him for their own purposes. If he was taken by the Americans, why no one ever admitted any of this, even though the logic of the Cold War required so much secrecy about Operation Paperclip. And what if he had escaped to Austria, Italy, Franco's Spain, Salazar's Lisbon, Cairo, or maybe South America? How come none of his former comrades ever ran into him, ever saw him, or ever admitted to even catching a glimpse of him anywhere? If the dark legends about the fate of so many leaders, even about Hitler himself, whose supposed death or supposed escape was speculated about for a long time, have circulated around the world, well, those about Müller, the rumors, the speculations, the gossip, have remained still alive even today. No one knows what happened to the spy, the policeman, the butcher, the bureaucrat, the man of the files, SS uniform, comfortably seated at his desk on Prince Albert Strasse. He ordered the death of dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions of defenseless and innocent citizens. The man who had gone from serving one master to another. The Bavarians, the Weimar Republic, Hitler, Goering, Heydrich, Himmler, Bornwald, a man of deep mystery. And I myself ask you again how much longer it will take before the mystery of Heinrich Müller's end is finally revealed. Thank you for staying with us until the end of the video. We hope you enjoyed it and that it provided you with additional information.